Begin on this side.
We are go.
Okay. And we've got, just 1 second. Okay, there we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and special guests, and welcome to the B'nai B'rith Canada monthly fireside Zoom chat, which will be hosted this evening by Rich Robertson, the Director of Research and Advocacy at B'nai B'rith Canada. Rich Robertson was born and raised in Thornhill. He holds a Juris Doctorate from Dalhousie University, and after law school, he pursued graduate studies in history at York University and the University of Ottawa, where his research focused on the topic of Holocaust. Richard has now been with B'nai B'rith since 2022. This Zoom chat is being presented live on our YouTube channel at the same time as we are following it on Zoom. I'm Aubrey Zeidenberg. Dr. Aubrey Zeidenberg volunteered at B'nai B'rith for over 30 years, Vice President of B'nai B'rith International for Canada, and founder and national chair of the Special Advisory Council to the League for Human Rights since 2004, and the police liaison for the organization. These monthly events are part of a series done in conjunction with our League for Human Rights, which is comprised of over 35 committed liaisons to the diverse multicultural communities, the collective minorities, the new majority, and is reflective of the new face of Canada. This advisory council, now in its 20th year, brings together community leaders under the umbrella of B'nai B'rith in an unbreakable friendship as friends of the family we choose for ourselves. For the last 10 years, I've also been the co-chair with the head of intelligence and organized crime of the York Regional Police Chiefs Community Advisory Council, ISCAC, and we are fortunate to have, as members of the B'nai B'rith Advisory Council, numerous senior police officers. Our Integrated Strategic Community Advisory Council deals with organized crime, terrorism, guns and gangs, drugs, vice, and human trafficking. 8 members of our B'nai B'rith Human Rights Advisory Council are also now members of the Police Chiefs ISCAC project up in York Region. Impressive past Zoom guests that have given us updates and insight into issues that impact our daily lives have been Jason Kenney, journalist Diane Francis, Richard Heidemann, the world president of B'nai B'rith International, CIBC world president and CEO Victor Dodig, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Federal Conservative Party, York Regional Police Chief Jim McSween, former Toronto Police Chief James Raymer, Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner Tom Carrique, our Education Minister in Ontario, Stephen Lecce, former Toronto Mayor John Tory, former Ontario Premier and Finance Minister Ernie Eves, Delia Opekakew, a leading First Nation attorney in Canada, our Solicitor General Michael Kersner, retired Canadian Senator Jerry Grafstein, Consul General of Israel Edith Shamir, as well as many others that have given us of their time. Our last speaker was Majid El Shafi, who is currently working in Israel on a documentary post-October 7 called Dying to Live. Our format this evening will be a 30-minute fireside chat with Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkiw, followed by a 15-minute Q&A opportunity with our Zoom guests. You can either send your questions in or raise your hand, and Rich will acknowledge you. Everyone on Zoom, please place yourselves in a mute mode at this time while I introduce our very special guest. Chief Myron Demkiw is a 33-year veteran of Toronto Police Services, appointed December 19, 2022 as the Chief of Police. Prior to his appointment, Chief Demkiw served as the Deputy Chief of Specialized Operations Command, where he oversaw 1,200 police officers, over 900 civilian members, and managed a budget of over $210 million. The command is comprised of the service's various investigative squads. He held the role of Staff Superintendent, and in his rank led Detective Services, then Corporate Risk Management, respectively. Under his leadership, the service's high-profile investigative units, such as Homicide, Integrated Guns and Gangs Task Force, and Hold-Up Squad, then Professional Standards Support, and Toronto Police College. Throughout the course of his career, Chief Demkiw has served as the unit commander of Intelligence Services, officer in charge of Strategy Management Corporate Projects. Chief Demkiw is a respected leader in the policing community. He's a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Major City Chiefs Association. Nationally, he's a member of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, co-chair of its Counter-Terrorism and National Security Committee, a member of the Law Amendments Committee, and a member of the National Working Group for supporting victims of terrorism and mass violence and counter-violent extremism. He is a graduate of the University of Toronto with a Global Professional Masters of Law degree, a Bachelor of Arts majoring in both criminology and political science, and Chief Demkiw is also a graduate of the Rotman School of Management Police Leadership Program. Ladies and gentlemen, a gentleman that we are proud and fortunate to have as our Chief of Police in Toronto, Myron Demkiw, and our host for this evening's event, Rich Robertson. Gentlemen.
Thank you so much for those amazing introductions. And before we begin, I just want to recognize one more person, the man behind this Zoom call, B'nai B'rith's IT guru, Bernie Howreich, who is helping to facilitate this. Oftentimes, Bernie doesn't get enough credit for his work, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that this wouldn't be happening without him behind the screen. Chief Demkiw, Aubrey laid out your very, very illustrious resume for us, and it really is an honor to have you for tonight's discussion. 33-year career in policing is nothing to shy away from, but I was wondering, perhaps we should start with maybe you telling our audience how you got into policing, what inspired you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with everybody. And Aubrey, thank you for that very generous introduction. Very much appreciated. So listen, like many kids, I had parents who only saw three professions that their kids should do. And it was doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And, university was kind of not an option in the household. So, of course, I grew up always understanding I'd go to university. And it was when I was in university and contemplating the future, and in my house at that point, it was pretty much, let's go to law school kind of approach, that I found myself actually in second year criminology. And I had to go to what I now understand is Superior Court and, watch a trial and see how it goes and do a report on it. And it was during that whole process that I really came to understand that I wanted to be in the justice system in some way, but I really identified that the police profession was the way I wanted to participate in the justice system. And that was really kind of the moment that I made that final decision of, law school was not as much as my parents would have loved that to happen, that I would, finish my degree and make a different choice. And that's precisely what happened.
So you went straight from that criminology course towards policing?
Yeah, I finished the degree and, spent a little time after university doing what young people do. And then, got into the hiring stream. And by January of 1990, I was at the police college.
And how have things, what's the biggest change since 1990 that you've noticed in policing?
Oh, I'd have to say one of the most significant changes is certainly technology. The evolution of technology is massive, and we feel it now in this digital age. We see it in our children, we see it in our workplaces, and thinking of all the data we can now collect and harvest and sometimes make great sense out of. That's probably been one of the most incredible evolutions. I mean, fundamentally, I'll tell you, there's one constant in policing, and it is a people business. So for all the efforts of efficiencies and immersing ourselves in technology, fundamentally, it does come down to relationships and people. But the biggest change, I'd say, is technology in all that we do. In every element of policing now, there is elements of technology.
And technology can be a bit of a double-edged sword. The Jewish community have seen an increase in what we consider to be online hate. Over the years, B'nai B'rith has seen the rise in online hate, specifically in the last 5 to 10 years, in our audit of anti-Semitic incidents. But more recently, since October 7th, I believe the community has really been feeling more angst online. What is Toronto Police doing to ensure that it stays ahead of online hate crimes?
Well, I think that's a really important conversation that we probably spend a number of hours on, because you're absolutely right. The technology has a good, but we've seen it put to really ill purpose. And online hate is one element of it, but I think it goes even further to online, toxic dialogue that really enables the hate in so many ways, and we see it certainly in our social media channels. I can tell you that our organization has turned our reply features off on social media because of the amount of hatred and the toxicity that existed in that space. So very, very relevant, certainly across the society, and particularly at this time for the Jewish community. We have certainly, our hate crime unit has been bolstered considerably to look at all forms of hate, including in the digital space. And what's important, I think, is to recognize our hate crime unit works within our intelligence environment. And in that environment, they're also enabled by our cybercrime team. In Toronto Police, we're fortunate in that we've invested many years ago in our cyber capabilities to investigate and not just detect breaches, but to investigate in that space that is very different and very unique. And whether it's the ability to participate in an undercover covert capacity or gather evidence digitally that is acceptable in court, identify people in that space, that's a work we've invested in. And our hate crime investigators benefit from that additional resource at intelligence services, and we continue to invest in that. And I think the other part of that space is the need to integrate across the sector. So we're very integrated with our provincial and federal partners, as well as with our security services. And without getting into great details on how we do that, the reality is policing a municipality like ours, the size and scope of our city, requires the police to be really connected with all levels of policing, and quite frankly, internationally as well, whether it's Homeland Security or FBI or across the Five Eyes community. We have those types of relationships, and we continue to invest in that capacity.
Wow. So one of the things I was curious about was how the interactions between our various police forces, and I think you just summarized that very eloquently, Chief Demkiw. On that note, though, since October 7th, we've seen a lot of demonstrations. At these demonstrations, we've seen some flags of terror organizations, and a lot of the concern that I have from some of the people who reach out to my department at B'nai B'rith is, would the police even know if there were terrorists in Canada? How are they able to monitor effectively? So maybe you could just speak a little bit more about the relationship between the various levels of government and the sort of the exchanges of information that allow you to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Western world certainly has changed a lot since 9/11. And as when we look back in history on how organizations were siloed in the past and some of the gaps that caused, we've definitely evolved in that space. So the national security investigative capacity is Of course, it's the RCMP has primacy, but they operate what's called an integrated national security team model. So the integrated national security enforcement team of Toronto is led by an RCMP senior officer, and we have a Toronto senior officer as the second in command. And then we have, of course, investigators assigned there. And that group actually is composed of police officers from across the jurisdictions in the Greater Toronto Area, up to and including the RCMP. So it's an integrated environment where identified national security threat investigations are handled. So that's first of all, and important to recognize that Toronto Police, because the scope and scale of our city, has a senior leadership role in that environment, not just investigators. Then you have the provincial anti-terrorism section, again, where the second in command is a Toronto member, recognizing the impact this municipality has in that space. And that's an additional provincial resource that works with the integrated national security enforcement team and with the police of jurisdiction. And then coming down to the municipal level, we have a very, very significant intelligence services capacity and organized crime capacity, which gives us an incredible amount of specialized tools to assist in supporting our national mandate, our provincial mandate, as well as our municipal mandate. And then within that environment, we have our hate crime unit, which we bolstered from 6 members to 32. And that hate crime unit is part of an integrated group, again, that focuses on extremism and hate, bringing together police of jurisdiction from across the province to share best practices, to understand what's happening in the environment, in the communities across the province, and importantly, to get ahead of trends and make sure that we share resources and learnings in a timely way. So I would, really paint it as a very integrated, top to bottom, side to side effort across the law enforcement and security service community.
And that's very refreshing to know. And it sounds like the Toronto Police are more than capable of staying ahead of the curve. But the community, despite a strong police presence, for instance, like at Avenue Road or the command centers that we've seen along Bathurst Street, they've felt ostracized by some of the responses to certain things. Maybe you can talk. One of the sticking points that we hear a lot is about the phrase "from the river to the sea." And I know that this isn't an easy discussion, but I do think that it's one that needs to be tersed out further. When it comes to a slogan that some consider genocidal and others consider to be a call for independence or greater autonomy, how does the police make a decision on how to proceed?
Yeah, that's a really important conversation to have, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it. And yes, it is hard. It is hard. I've found the best way I could describe it is we live in a beautiful democracy, but this democracy isn't always perfect. And when it comes to freedom of expression and free speech, it is a complicated bit of legislation in Canada. And the police, have to work within the confines of the law. So the legal framework effectively for almost all elements of hate speech require the Ministry of Attorney General consent on all but a small amount of charges, require ministry consent to lay the charge. So effectively what happens is in all cases, we gather evidence where there's bona fide evidence that we can act on immediately and we have the power to do so and the resources to do so. We do our best to do that. But we gather evidence and we investigate. And when it comes to from the river to the sea, it's certainly something that since I can remember working in the intelligence environment has come up from time to time, and particularly since October 7th, has become something, frankly, of global conversation. And as we know, some countries have taken steps to deliberately deal with that particular phrase in a certain legal context. But in Canada, we gather the evidence on when these speeches happen, and we bring the evidence forward when we can to the ministry for consideration. And some of the factors that have to be considered when we look at that is certainly the nature of the gathering, where that's, that kind of language is used, other things that are said, spoken or expressed, things that are displayed, the background of the people involved, things like crowd size dynamics all play factors that have to be gathered by our investigators and brought forth for consideration. But we do it. And we do it with the ministry. We do have an excellent relationship with the Ministry of the Attorney General. They are responsive. They are very engaged. And particularly since October 7th, we have a very streamlined approach to get engaged with the ministry so that when there is an opportunity to lay charges, that would be able to happen. But it is a bit of complicated law given the freedom of speech legislation we presently operate under.
And has an incident of from the river to the sea been brought to the ministry's attention?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. We've not received consent to lay the charges.
Okay, and that is very comforting to know, and it's good to see that our police services and our Ministry of the Attorney General are reacting to things like that. I know that is a phrase that it particularly can be seen as harmful to members of our community. Is obviously the position of B'nai B'rith is that it calls for the erasure of the Jewish state of Israel. So we've seen a lot of incitement in the city. The Avenue Road protest sort of was the focal point for that. Maybe you can discuss with the audience. I mean, I'm personally curious, what finally compelled police action? There were several protests, and then you came out with that great statement about wanting to act in the name of public safety. What was the impetus?
Well, I think, listen, we first of all listen to our communities and understand the perspectives of the community. And as the days, the protest events continued, we certainly heard loud and clear the impact it was having on the communities. Efforts to de-escalate and manage demonstrations. We do generally, we try very hard to de-escalate and manage things in a way where we try to de-escalate as much as possible. And clearly our ability to keep people safe on that overpass and not demonstrating was not going in a direction that was effective. And the only way to affect our purpose safely and maintain the public safety, and importantly, the overpass, not only is it in the heart of the Jewish community, it's over a piece of critical infrastructure. And it's very hard for us to affect our purpose safely when you're on an overpass. And, we've seen the history in the city of demonstrations that got onto the Don Valley Parkway, for example. And our options from a safety perspective are very different when you're 100 or 200 feet in the air over an overpass. So the way we could affect our purpose of ensuring public safety and preventing offenses was to ensure that people understood that we wouldn't be allowing gatherings on that overpass. And that's what happened.
So with public security and public safety as an impetus, each year we see the Al-Quds Day rally happening in Toronto, and I know that there's been calls each year for Al-Quds Day to be canceled or for the police to take a more proactive measure to mitigate the risk of Al-Quds Day. And I'm bringing this up, Chief, because already it's only January, and this event will happen in the spring. Sorry, it's the end of February. Time flies. This event will be happening late in the spring, but already I'm hearing a lot of angst in the community about Al-Quds Day. Is there a plan for Al-Quds Day 2024, considering how tense the city is?
Well, I think, that day is something we are familiar with policing, and we'll continue, planning in the context of the world we live in. And we understand the concerns of the community. These are concerns that every year are discussed, frankly, and we work very hard to try to manage the situations in the safest way possible. And again, importantly, we take steps to gather evidence and where offenses are committed and we can affect our purpose to arrest, and it's appropriate to do so, we do. And we'll be planning, with the context of the world we're in. And we certainly understand the angst in the community.
I really like that phrase, from the context of the world we live in. To me, it's comforting to know that that's your approach to policing, is to be so nuanced based on what's occurring. And what special plans do the police have for combating the rise in anti-Semitism that we're currently witnessing? Are there any special initiatives?
Oh my gosh, that's a wonderful question and an important one. And I will tell you, I'm very proud of our Toronto Police leadership and our members who've done a number of things since October. So, let's go to the days after October 7th. And again, recognizing that geopolitical events impact our city, which, celebrates its diversity, but with its diversity comes the impact of world events differently than perhaps in other communities. And October 7th, we knew immediately there'd be a significant impact here. And anti-Semitism is a challenge, as we know, as it relates to hate each and every year. But we knew with October 7th, there'd be additional concerns given what had transpired. So we took a whole of service approach very, very quickly. And what that means is, of course, we deployed officers immediately into the Bathurst Street corridor, into that part of the city where we know there's a large amount of Jewish residents. We put the command posts in the community, particularly for visibility, but also for ease of access and in understanding that police are there to be contacted with any concerns. I directed that all our members be prepared to deploy in uniform at a moment's notice, so we'd have the capacity. I know are familiar with the budget discussions in the city. Well, with those discussions comes the need for us to be strategic about our resource deployment. So we asked all our officers to be ready to deploy should the need arise. We stood up our major incident command center to oversee operations, and we called our response Project Resolute. And that's what we named it. And we have since days after October 7th, had 7 days a week, additional presence in the Jewish neighborhoods, synagogues, schools, community centers, and the like, as well as our command posts. We, of course, did a lot of engagement in the community, but we also mobilized into the Muslim community, where we went to mosques around the city. So it's a little different community dynamic there, of course. Mosques are all over the city. So we took steps to also build rapport and relationships there. Again, recognizing that the geopolitical events are having impacts across our city. So that was, the front facing things that happened. Additionally, we bolstered, as I said, our hate crime unit, went from 6 members to 32. And we invested heavily in resources to deal with the influx of hate crime occurrences that had taken place. The other thing we did is we really tried to remove barriers to letting us know about events. And, there was a really high spike in hate-related graffiti in the aftermath of October 7th. So we went to a web-based QR code way to report that type of event. And in fact, I'll tell you, it was inspired by a message I'd received from a member of the Jewish community who indicated there was graffiti on a pole, and a friend was online or on the phone trying to report it, for a long time on hold. And I took that back to the command team. I said, look, we have to simplify access to us to report these types of events. We got to make it simple and fast. And the team came up with, this ability to use a QR code to engage us. And now we have a team of people who monitor that intake, that intake form that is now generated digitally. And we respond to remove the graffiti, but also to gather any evidence that we possibly can. So that's been another bit of work. And I'll tell you, just for some statistics, we've had 59 arrests by the hate crime unit with 149 hate-related charges, which, is an unprecedented amount of enforcement, successful enforcement that's taken place because of this commitment of resources. And I was just speaking to the unit commander of that unit earlier today, and she was describing just how incredibly engaged our hate crime investigators are and continue to work very, very, very hard. So that was on the ground, Toronto Police. The other part is, of course, we really focused on our integrated efforts with our partners and making sure those lines of communication were robust, open, and able to be leveraged when needed. So we made sure of that. I've been personally in touch, of course, with Commissioner Creek as well as Deputy Commissioner Matt Peggs, who's the commander of RCMPO division. And we also have a national roundtable that Commissioner Duhem, I, and other police leaders participate in across the country, so that we can understand what's happening in other parts of our country as it relates to, the impact of geopolitical events in the Middle East. And I will say that Toronto has an unprecedented amount of events. Again, for context, demonstrations, we've had over 500 demonstrations planned and unplanned since October 7th, which is, a very, very significant pace of operations. We are seeing that pace of operations come down a little bit right now. We're hoping to see a continued downward trend, but a really, really high pace of operations. We've committed a full incident command team to that, 7 days a week. They're stood up, and you may recall we've gone through so many iterations of the types of demonstrations we faced, from large scale up to 25,000 to a string of multiple small demonstrations simultaneously across the city, to flag waving on overpasses, focused on Avenue Road for a period, now focused on other overpasses. And, we keep seeing changing dynamics, but we continue to keep our capacity in place to respond. And I think importantly, back to where I started, is really engaging with the community on the ground to really get a sense of tone and temperament in the community so we can be as responsive as we can be. But I've said this, in many rooms now, there comes a time when our presence can scale back and should scale back. I'm not suggesting we're there, but I know there comes a time when that has to happen because the community might want to see it happen. And I think what's important is building that trust and rapport, which I think we've done for the most part across the communities impacted, so that we can scale up and scale down in a timely manner when needed.
Some of the interactions, Chief Demkiw, that you described, having the ability to go one day to the Jewish community and then another day to the Muslim community, it puts you and your officers in a unique position. What type of training, what type of efforts are being put into making police the peacemakers?
Again, and I should have covered it in the last question, because training is something we have also focused on uniquely as a result of October 7th. So let me just, in the aftermath of October 7th, I actually had the executive leadership. We had a meeting with an imam who provided one perspective, and then we traveled to the Holocaust Museum and met with Jewish community members to hear perspectives so that our leadership would actually understand in a more rich, dynamic way the impact of geopolitical events. I benefited from a trip with Inspector Rinkoff, who's on the call. Him and I traveled with Francis Simon Wiesenthal, Compassion Action, actually July of 2023, to Poland and Israel, where we really did an immersive learning on the impact of the Holocaust, and particularly the historical context of the Holocaust, and then the Jewish people after World War II, which really has helped, quite frankly, inform my perspectives. And we certainly saw the value of training. So we did some of that exposure to our executive. And since then, we've worked on developing training for all our members on Judaism and anti-Semitism and the impacts of anti-Semitism. All members are now engaged on a training module, and the same for Islamophobia and understanding Islam better. So we've invested in training so that they can understand the perspectives of people they're serving, our members. And then we rely on our liaison officers and our neighborhood officers who have relationships. So, you've got Inspector Rinkoff on this call, Michelle Gillespie, some of you, of course, will know, Jack Gurr, of course, you'll know, who are very much immersed in serving across the city, but particularly give us the perspectives of the Jewish community. We also have Muslim liaison officers and our neighborhood officers who work in the local divisions across the city. So even the command posts at Bathurst and Glencairn were often staffed by local divisional officers who serve the community regularly, and now have been asked to serve in a specific way, so that we would be able to bridge any divides and really understand perspectives, and make sure that we're responsive in a culturally sensitive way.
And I know that we have to open it up to questions in just a minute, but I do have one more thing that I wanted to discuss with you before we turn it over to the audience, Chief Demkiw. And that has to do with when Toronto police start to identify something as a hate crime. There's been, despite all the resources and all the proactive work, there's been a string of break-ins in the Bathurst Street corridor as of late. And there's a genuine concern amongst the community that those are related to some extent to the geopolitical issues that we've been discussing here tonight. At what point, so maybe you could just talk to us a little bit about how Toronto police would investigate a string of break-ins in the context, as you said, it's the context of the world we live in. So how would you go about it ensuring that there was a link or there wasn't a link to a larger hate motivated offense?
Yeah, that's a great question, particularly since we have seen a string of those break-in enters. One of the first things we do on any crime scene is, of course, examine it, and we take a look at what evidence was taken or what evidence was disturbed or what evidence is left behind. In the case of the break-ins, what we did notice very quickly, and it was not just on the Bathurst Street corridor, in fact, we saw it across different parts of the city, is point-of-sale terminals were being targeted. There was no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the target of the break-in was anything other than the cash registers for the float for the morning, and then specifically point-of-sale terminals. So we saw definitely a pattern of break-in enters, but behind that pattern, what we saw was point-of-sale terminals were being targeted. And I can tell you that we've had investigations done and that led to the recovery of 70 point-of-sale terminals and 16 arrested since January of 2023. So we have seen a rash of that. Councillor Cole is actually holding an event tomorrow to bring greater awareness to this, to the business community with our members, because it has been there's been a significant uptick in that type of break and enter. So, we certainly appreciate it. We recognize that when it happened on Bathurst Street, particularly at Grifes, if I recall, when this kind of thing started to become an issue, we, of course, turn our mind to any evidence of hate that would suggest that. But we also, behind the scenes, saw that very clearly the point-of-sale terminals were being targeted. And, regrettably, Grifes was victimized, along with many other businesses around the downtown core. So we saw no evidence to suggest hate. In fact, quite something different.
Well, we started with changes in policing due to technology in your 33-year career, and we're ending, I think, somewhat fittingly with people stealing technological implements from restaurants. So we've gone full circle. I think now, let's open up the floor to some questions. Before I start taking questions, I just want to remind everyone, it's something I always like to say before a question and answer period is, we're very blessed to have Chief Demkiw with us. So let's have questions instead of commentary for the chief. We're here. He's our distinguished guest. He's the one we want to hear from tonight, although I'm sure you all have amazing input. I see Viv Ziner has a question. So we'll start with Viv, and as well, just before we go to Viv, raise your hand. I'll do my best to see all the hands. If not, put a question in the chat and I can orate it to the chief. But Viv, why don't you get us started?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for being here, Chief. We very much appreciate it. And in the same vein, I want to say Slava Ukraini, because
Slava.
I work with Peter Stern and with Lida Lara, who are my very good friends. Yes. So I just wanted to share that I've been involved in terms of trying to be there for the Ukrainian community, and Lida comes with me to everything. I think we've almost got her kind of on, I'm just kidding, in terms of Jewish. My questions are, Leela, shush, my husky is contributing here. Lee, stop it. My first question has to do with the demonstrations, because people have been very concerned. My concern is that we have all these people that are stopping traffic, that are causing havoc, that really are creating a scenario. And I understand that you can only do so much without the government being involved, but I mean, here we had the Emergency Act in terms of the convoy situation, but these demonstrations have not been curtailed or stopped or so that really is my first question. And my second one has to do, and it ties in, just this past week, somebody went to a Raptors game, and it's happened a few times where they were wearing a sweatshirt that said, "Bring our hostages home," or something like that. They were asked to either leave or take off their sweatshirt. And I find that very unfair. If people can wear keffiyehs, that we can't wear something that says, "Bring home our hostages." So those are my two questions. Thank you.
So Viv, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on that. Please say hi to Leela. But let me start with the second one, and I'll go back to the first one. As it relates to what happens at a Raptor game, that is something that is Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment's purview. It's their environment. We support their security for the purpose of keeping the peace. And to the extent necessary, assisting in anything that might be related to trespassing or the like. But it is an MLSE matter, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on that. And you know, perhaps that type of stuff is really for MLSE to speak to. As it relates to management of demonstrations, you know, I think one of the things is they're incredibly dynamic. They're incredibly challenging things to do. And we always try to strike a balance between the charter protected right of freedom of expression and assembly, which, you know, this country has a long tradition of, and maintaining the peace and trying to keep the city moving in a reasonably decent direction during demonstrations. So there's no one answer other than to say that we do everything we can to de-escalate and keep things calm as much as we can. And we certainly gather evidence throughout events. And if there's any suspicion of criminal activity, then we do what we can at the time, depending on the resources, scope, and scale of events. But we gather evidence, investigate, and affect our purpose after when appropriate. And we've done that a number of times. You know, we've actually had an investigation for public incitement of hatred, which involved a demonstration and the displaying of a flag of an identified terrorist entity, where we were able to make an arrest safely and put someone before the courts. But that's you know, a bit of work that is certainly very dynamic, and we do everything we can to keep things as peaceful and maintain peace and order as much as we can, and gather evidence and affect our purpose when appropriate and safe to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had to put my thank you back on. Okay.
I don't see any new chat. I do see a message in the chat from Mr. Jonathan Weiss. How many arrests have been made since the protests at Mount Sinai Hospital? Isn't it illegal to block a hospital entrance? Chief?
Yeah, so yes, there are laws that govern the blocking of hospitals, and what we've taken steps actually to make sure that there are certain things we do to help prevent that from happening. But again, you know, protests, that protest particularly moved from Yonge and Bloor, as I recall, through the city. You know, sometimes very dynamically things happen. And again, we continue to investigate. I don't have in front of me the status of those investigations specifically, but they are, as I said, very dynamic events. There are laws that govern that, and we'll take steps to enforce them when the opportunities present.
Thank you. I don't see any other chat. I don't see any other hands. We still have the chief for a few more minutes. So if anyone does have any other questions, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer them. While we're waiting for questions, Chief, I have an additional question for you, something we didn't get to go through during our discussion. And that's it. So yesterday we saw some new proposed online harms legislation. There was a new peace bond. There was enhanced There was enhanced penalties for hate crimes. Do you think that these will be utilities that will affect change if introduced?
Yeah, I think, like any law reform, the details will matter once it gets through all the committees and everything. I think what's important is, the government is taking steps to identify opportunities for enhancement in the legislation, and we certainly welcome all opportunities to give us a chance to tackle hate in a more effective way. So we'll see how it all kind of comes together in the end. But I do believe it is time to have discussions with our, legal, with our parliamentarians on, the legal framework in which we live in which we police in, particularly in this space. So we welcome these efforts, and we'll see how it all plays out.
Would you welcome an expansion of 319 2.1 if it contained more than just Holocaust denial and distortion?
Well, again, that it'll really matter what the details are. I do believe this. I think, one thing I think we as a community across Canada, I think could agree on is that since October 7th, we have seen discourse that is less than positive. We have seen discourse that is hurtful, hateful, and it's time for us to have a conversation on the value systems which are governing us, and whether there's an opportunity for some law reform to really reinforce the value systems we all hold so dear. And again, it is a tough discussion from a legal perspective because it really bumps up against the charter, and we understand that. And I know communities understand that, but I do think we can have a much richer discussion coming, out of events since October 7th. And I think it's time for those kinds of things to evolve. And, they will start in community rooms, as they often do. They'll start in meetings like this, and they'll evolve to discussions with lawmakers. And I think it's really an opportunity now, as we watch the world in front of us shift and change, to really identify the values that matter to us as a community and make sure that our legal system is doing all it can to help support what we hold dear.
And perfect timing. There's a new question that just popped into the chat box, but Chief, I couldn't have said it better myself. You've left me almost speechless, and that's very hard to do as I'm on this call now. Nathan Ladovsky asks, are there any instances where you have seen good interfaith dialogue between the communities affected by October 7th?
Oh, yes. Yeah, actually, recently we had our liaison officers gather, I believe, in Holy Blossom with Muslim and Jewish faith leaders for some interfaith dialogue, which was, to me, an incredible step forward. And I think we actually, put it out to our social media because I think it warrants recognition that there is an opportunity for interfaith dialogue. I'll tell you, we're dealing right now with a set of gun violence in the northwest end of the city. And we've relied on our faith community to bring the communities impacted by that violence together. And we actually have young people from conflicted neighborhoods together because of faith up there, and able to come together and have progressive, positive dialogue when sometime before they couldn't cross the street near one another without, the potential for conflict. So I think the power of faith is clear. And we have seen a step forward, particularly as it relates to the Jewish and Muslim community recently at an event at Holy Blossom. I do think we have examples, and hopefully we'll see more of that.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Nathan, for the question. Viv, I see your hand. We don't have any other questions, so we'll give Viv a second crack.
Hi, sorry. Now I'm just, everybody in my family was talking at the same time. So I just have to get my, Chief, have you connected with people like Raheel Raza, who is an unbelievable Muslim who has spoken to the House of Lords and has received the Jubilee Award? And she's our national treasure. She's very involved in terms of Muslim Jewish interfaith dialogue. And And if you haven't met her yet, I'm really happy to introduce you because she's my sister. So there you go.
All right. So I'm not sure if I met Raheel, as I expect I haven't because I don't recognize her name immediately. So I will take you up on that offer, but I will tell you I've met with leaders in the Muslim community, and we've recently met with Canadian Council of Imams. And with Ramadan coming, we're going to take the opportunity to do some engagement during Ramadan across the city. And importantly, after Ramadan, I'll be meeting with the imams. And we're really looking for an opportunity to build some relationships in places where we don't have them as strong as we need. And I hope out of that will come some opportunities for interfaith work. And I'll tell you, our chaplaincy within the Toronto Police has a rabbi and has a Muslim cleric, and there's another place where we do faith-based events that hopefully will have some interfaith opportunities on a broader scale that we can build off of our own very own chaplaincy within the Toronto Police. So work in progress for sure, and many engagements ongoing. And I will say this, I will say there's incredible positivity on the relationships, and I do believe we're getting in a much better place where interfaith engagement is going to be possible on a bigger scale.
Thank you. So one of the things, I'm very happy to introduce you to Raheel, and she's doing an incredible job in terms of connecting with the Jewish community, reaching out. She's really an extraordinary person. So it's my pleasure. If I can get a hold of you, I'm really happy to do that. So
We'll make that happen. I appreciate that.
Jukui, thank you.
And Chief Demkiw, I don't see any other questions. So maybe we can end with one final question, which is we have a lot of activist-minded people on this call. We have a lot of people have taken their time out of today, and we thank you for taking your time or time out of their evening, not their day, sorry, to meet here tonight because they're concerned about their communities. So you do have an audience, who's motivated to be proactive after this call. Maybe if you could, if you could give an ask. I always like to end this way to the audience. What type of resources, what type of things can we now go and ask for from stakeholders, from leaders? What will help you do your job?
Well, that's a great question. But I think we saw just recently the power of community engagement in matters of civic importance. And this last budget cycle, we saw a lot of civic engagement, including from the Jewish community, which we are very grateful for. But I would say, stay civically engaged with your federally, provincially, and locally. I will tell you that as much as we got our budget, I believe the biggest step forward and the most positive thing that came out of the budget cycle was a willingness to listen to a multi-year hiring strategy for policing. And it's time for this city to depoliticize the police budget and invest and understand the need for investment in public safety. And to the extent that the community needs to have a voice at that table, which I'd suggest is significant, the community should be informing that, then I'd really ask everyone to stay as active as you possibly can in civic engagement. Particularly around things that matter in the community and in the context of community safety and well-being. To the extent that you see a need to talk about policing, please do. Please do. Please continue that. We can't let it be a budget cycle discussion. We're working very hard now to reframe the discussion to be a year-long discussion and to be a multi-year discussion because we need to ensure the well-being of this city over the long term. And that takes many, many forms, but being safe is one of the important forms it takes. And I think it's a really good opportunity coming off this last budget to turn the discussion into something a lot more strategic and a lot more long-term than just one yearly budget cycle.
Thank you, Chief. It's honestly, it's been a pleasure to chat with you tonight and to have insight into all the hard work that the Toronto Police are doing on behalf of the Jewish community, on behalf of our community in general. So I'd like to take the personal opportunity to thank you for your work and your leadership at the forefront of Toronto policing. And I'm going to turn it back over to Aubrey to conclude our fireside chat.
Thank you very much. Chief, I cannot thank you enough for your very informative, sincere, detailed Zoom chat, your steady hand, restraint, and vision that you have shown in your planning and your coordination to secure the City of Toronto for its citizens. You've done a wonderful job, and from the heart, we thank you for what you have been able to provide us with at this point in time. I'd like to thank all of the attendees and take a moment to inform you of a couple of the upcoming events. Our next speaker is going to be newspaper writer and political consultant Warren Kinsella. Any of you that have been following Warren Kinsella will know that he is truly a voice that is going to be an important one for our audience to be able to hear. Then we're going to have Pastor Judith James of the Revival Time Tabernacle Ministries. Judith's family goes back a long time as part of the Black community that has brought it together. Her father was Reverend Audley James, and she and her family have taken over the ministry and do a wonderful job. We very much look forward to creating a nice dialogue between the Jewish community and the Black community, the diverse Black communities, knowing that there's an old relationship there that needs to be rekindled. When Martin Luther King walked, he walked arm in arm with the rabbis in the Deep South in the early 60s as they moved things forward to make the changes that were necessary in the history of our great countries. I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. Look forward to future invitations that will be coming out to you. And let us all pray for light to overpower darkness during these very difficult times. We will see you next month, and good night. Thank you.
So very much.